He left on a Thursday. By Sunday, I had 2 kids, half a bank account, and no plan. I've been meaning to write this out for almost a year now. I'd start, delete it, close the laptop, tell myself it was too much, too personal, too raw. But something about tonight feels different. The kids are asleep. The house is quiet in that specific way it gets after 8 o'clock when the dishes are done, and the backpacks are packed for tomorrow, and there's nothing left to do but sit with yourself. So I'm sitting, and I'm finally writing it. This is the story of how my life came apart on a Thursday afternoon, and how I put it back together with my bare hands. One ordinary day at a time. I need to start by telling you what kind of woman I was before all of this. I was the kind of woman who had a meal plan. Every Sunday, I'd sit at the kitchen table with a notepad and write out the week. Monday pasta, Tuesday chicken, Wednesday leftovers, and so on. I had a color-coded calendar on the refrigerator. I kept a running grocery list on my phone. I volunteered at my daughter Emma's school once a month and never missed a teacher conference and knew every kid in my son Tyler's kindergarten class by name. I was organized. I was present. I was, by every external measure, a woman who had things handled. What I didn't have handled was my marriage, but I'd gotten so good at managing everything around it that for a long time I confused the two things. His name is Ryan. We'd been together for 9 years, married for 7. He sells commercial insurance and coaches Tyler's soccer team on Saturday mornings, and makes really good breakfast burritos on the weekends. I want to say that clearly because it would be easier if he were the kind of person who was obviously bad. He wasn't. He was ordinary in all the ways that make someone hard to leave and hard to explain leaving. The Thursday he left, I was in the kitchen unloading the dishwasher. Emma was at the table doing homework. Tyler was on the living room floor with his Legos. Ryan came in from work, set his bag down by the door the way he always did, and stood in the kitchen doorway for a moment without saying anything. I noticed but didn't look up. I was stacking plates. "I need to talk to you," he said. Something in his voice made me set the plate down. Not loudly. I just set it down and turned around. He didn't do it in front of the kids, at least. He waited until Emma had taken Tyler upstairs for their bath. This 9-year-old shepherding her 5-year-old brother up the stairs without being asked, the way she'd learned to do when she sensed tension in the room. My daughter had learned to read a room by age 9. I don't love that about how we raised her. We sat at the kitchen table and Ryan told me he wasn't happy, that he hadn't been happy for a long time, that he thought we had grown into different people, and he didn't think it was fair to either of us to keep pretending otherwise. I sat there and listened. I'm a listener by nature. It's both my best quality and the one that has cost me the most. When he finished, I asked him one question. "Is there someone else?" He looked at the table. "It's complicated," which is not a no. We both knew that. I asked him to sleep in the guest room that night. He did. In the morning, he got up and made the kids breakfast like normal and took Tyler to school, and I took Emma, and when I got back to the house, he had packed 2 bags and they were by the front door. "I think I should stay somewhere else for a while," he said. "Give us both space to think." I looked at those 2 bags. He'd packed 2 bags the night before, while I was putting the kids to bed. While I was reading Tyler his story and telling Emma to turn her light off by 9. He'd been in the bedroom packing while I was doing the ordinary things, and I hadn't heard a sound. "Where will you go?" I asked. "My brother's," he said. His brother lives 20 minutes away. I found out later he wasn't at his brother's, but that came later. He hugged me at the door. An actual hug. Real and long. The kind that made it worse rather than better. Then he picked up his 2 bags and walked to his car. And I stood in the doorway and watched him back out of the driveway. And I kept standing there after his car turned the corner and disappeared. Then I went inside and sat on the kitchen floor. Not because I was dramatic, not because I was falling apart, though I was. I sat on the kitchen floor because my legs just didn't want to hold me up anymore, and the floor was there and it was solid, and that felt important right then. Something solid. I sat there for about 20 minutes. Then I got up because Tyler had a dentist appointment Friday morning and I needed to confirm it, and Emma had a permission slip due and the dishwasher still needed to be finished. And life, I was learning, does not pause for the kitchen floor. That was the Thursday. By Sunday, he had called to say he needed access to our joint account for some expenses. I said okay because I didn't know yet that I could say anything else. By Sunday evening, I opened the banking app for the first time since before he left and looked at the balance and sat down again. Not the floor this time. The couch, the account wasn't empty. I want to be precise. He hadn't cleaned it out, nothing that dramatic. But the number I was looking at was roughly half of what I expected. And there were 3 withdrawals in the last 2 weeks before he even left that I hadn't known about. 2 kids, half an account, no plan. That was my Sunday. I called my sister Diane that night after the kids were in bed and she picked up on the second ring and I said, "Ryan left," and she said, "I'm coming over," and I said, "It's 9 o'clock. And she said, "I'm already in the car." Diane sat on my couch until midnight while I talked, and she listened, and at some point she said, "Carol, what do you actually need right now? Not tomorrow, not next week. Tonight." I thought about it. "I need to know I'm going to be okay," I said. She looked at me for a long moment. My sister, who has known me for 41 years, who was the maid of honor at the wedding that led to this kitchen, this couch, this Sunday night, "You're going to be okay," she said, "but it's going to take longer than you want it to." She was right about both things. What I didn't know that Sunday night, sitting on the couch with Diane while my kids slept upstairs, was that the complicated Ryan had mentioned wasn't recent. The woman he was staying with, because it was a woman, not his brother's couch, had been in our lives in a way I hadn't understood yet. I was about to find out that the last year of my marriage had looked very different from the inside than it had from the outside, and the person who finally told me was someone I never expected. I want to tell you something about the week after Ryan left. I functioned. That's the word for it. I didn't fall apart in any visible way. I got the kids up every morning, made lunches, drove carpool, sat at my desk at work and answered emails, and attended a Tuesday staff meeting where someone brought donuts and I ate one and laughed at something my coworker said, and nobody in that room had any idea that my entire life had just been quietly restructured without my permission. That's the thing. Nobody tells you about the early days after something like this. You expect to be visibly broken. You expect people to be able to see it on you, but mostly you just look like yourself, moving through your regular life, and the disconnect between how ordinary everything looks and how completely disoriented you feel on the inside is its own specific kind of loneliness. Emma knew something was wrong. She's 9 and sharp in the way quiet kids often are. She observes more than she speaks, and she'd been watching Ryan and me for months with those careful eyes of hers. The morning after Ryan left, she came downstairs and looked at the guest room door, which was open and empty, and then looked at me at the kitchen counter and said, "Is Daddy coming back for dinner?" I kept my eyes on the coffee maker. "Not tonight, baby. He's staying at Uncle Derek's for a little while." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "How little a while?" I turned around and looked at my daughter, 9 years old in her soccer socks and her hair still messy from sleep, asking me a question I didn't know how to answer honestly without breaking something I wasn't ready to break yet. "I don't know yet," I said. "But you and Tyler are okay. That's what matters." She nodded slowly, went and poured herself cereal. Didn't ask again. Tyler was 5 and mostly confused. He asked where Daddy was every night for the first week, and I said Daddy was at Uncle Derek's helping with some things. And Tyler accepted that the way 5-year-olds accept things, completely, temporarily, with the full intention of asking again tomorrow, which he did. Every night, for 11 days straight. On the 12th day, he stopped asking, and that was somehow worse. The person who told me the truth was my neighbor, Linda. Linda is 54 years old and has lived next door to us for 6 years and grows tomatoes in her backyard every summer and brings them over in a little basket like something out of a painting. She is warm and direct and the kind of neighbor who notices things without being nosy about them. She'd wave from her driveway in the mornings and ask how the kids were doing, and remember that Emma had a big soccer game coming up because I'd mentioned it 3 weeks ago. She knocked on my door on a Saturday morning, 11 days after Ryan left. She had coffee. 2 cups, one for each of us. She'd called ahead, asked if she could stop by, said she needed to talk to me about something. I knew from the way she said it that it wasn't about tomatoes. We sat at my kitchen table and she wrapped both hands around her mug and looked at me with the expression of someone who has been deciding whether to say something for a long time and has finally decided. "I debated this," she said. "I want you to know that. I went back and forth for weeks, and I kept thinking it wasn't my place, and then I kept thinking, if it were me, I'd want to know." I set my coffee down. "Okay, there's a woman," Linda said carefully. "She drives a white Subaru. She started parking on our street about 14 months ago. At first, I thought she was visiting someone further down, but she was always parked in front of your house, Carol. Always when Ryan's truck was in the driveway and your car wasn't. 14 months, I heard the number and did what I'd been doing a lot lately. I went very still on the outside while something loud happened on the inside." "You're sure it was in front of my house?" I said. "I wrote down the plate number after the 4th or 5th time," Linda said. "I didn't know what I was going to do with it, but something felt wrong and I wrote it down." She slid a piece of paper across the table. Neat handwriting. A license plate number, and next to it, a series of dates going back 14 months, the first one in January of last year. 14 months ago, I had been right here in this house. I had been making meal plans and driving carpool and reading Tyler his bedtime story and keeping the color-coded calendar on the refrigerator perfectly up to date. I looked at that piece of paper for a long time. "Did you ever see her face?" I asked once. She was walking back to her car. Dark hair, maybe mid-30s. She was on her phone. Linda paused. "She looked like a regular person." That's the thing that bothered me. She just looked like a regular person. They always do. That's what I didn't say out loud. I need to tell you what 14 months meant to me in practical terms. 14 months ago, Tyler had just started pre-K. I remember that fall clearly. The new backpack, the little first day photo I took on the front porch, the way he cried the first week, and then suddenly loved it. Ryan had been so good that fall, present and warm and helpful in the ways he sometimes was when I least expected it. He'd taken Tyler to school twice a week because my work schedule was heavy. And I remember thinking, we're okay. Whatever rough patch we'd been in, we were coming out the other side. We weren't coming out of anything. I was just the only one who didn't know what was actually happening. I sat with that for a long time after Linda left. She'd hugged me at the door. This woman who grew tomatoes and kept notes in neat handwriting and had decided that telling me was kinder than not. I thanked her, and I meant it. And I stood on my porch until her door closed, and then I went inside. Emma was at a friend's house. Tyler was watching cartoons in the living room. I went upstairs to my bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed. Ryan's side, not mine. I don't know why. And I looked at the piece of paper in my hand. 14 months. I thought about every dinner, every school pickup, every Saturday morning soccer game where Ryan stood on the sideline coaching Tyler's team, with his hands in his pockets and his eyes on the field. All of it running parallel to this. All of it happening at the same time as those dates on Linda's piece of paper. I wasn't sad anymore. That's what I noticed. Somewhere between Linda's kitchen table and my bedroom, I had moved out of sad and into something quieter and more focused. Something that felt, if I was honest, a lot like clarity. I picked up my phone and called Diane. "I need a recommendation," I said when she picked up. "A good family attorney. Not expensive fancy. Just good." Diane was quiet for a second. "What happened?" "Nothing new," I said. "I just finally understand what already happened." She gave me a name. A woman named Patricia Hollins, who had an office downtown and had handled Diane's friend's divorce 2 years ago. "She's straightforward," Diane said. "She doesn't sugarcoat." "Good," I said. "I don't need sugar right now." I called Patricia Hollins on Monday morning from my car in the work parking lot, 5 minutes before my shift started. I explained the situation in the flat, factual way I'd been practicing in my head all weekend. She listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she said, "Can you come in Wednesday at 4? "Yes," I said. "Bring whatever financial documents you have access to. Bank statements, mortgage, anything in both names." "I have everything," I said. Because I did. Because I was the one who kept the files, the folders, the rubber-banded records going back years. Because being organized had always been my job in this marriage, and for the first time, I understood that it was also going to be my advantage. I went into work. I answered emails. I ate lunch at my desk. I drove carpool at 3:15 and helped Tyler with his shoes and started dinner and gave Emma her spelling words to practice. And on Wednesday at 4, I sat across from Patricia Hollins with a folder of documents and started the actual work of understanding what my life looked like from the outside. What Patricia found in those documents wasn't a bombshell. It was quieter than that. A pattern, she called it. Small decisions made over a long period of time that added up to something I needed to understand before we went any further. She slid one particular bank statement across the desk and pointed to a series of transactions and said, "Do you recognize these?" I looked at the dates. I looked at the amounts. I thought about Linda's piece of paper and the white Subaru and 14 months. "No," I said, "but I think I know what they are." Patricia nodded. "Then we have somewhere to start. I want to be honest about something before I get into this part." By the time Wednesday rolled around and I sat across from Patricia Hollins with my folder of documents, I had already built a wall around myself. Not an angry wall. More like the kind you build when you need to get through something functional and you know that falling apart in the middle of it won't help anyone. Least of all your kids. I had become, in the space of 2 weeks, extremely practical. Grocery lists still happened. Bedtime routines still happened. I cried exactly once, on a Tuesday night in the shower, and then I turned the water to cold and got out, and that was that. Patricia Hollins is in her late 40s, I'd guess. Short, natural hair, reading glasses she takes on and off while she talks, a desk that is covered in organized stacks of paper that somehow never seem to get smaller. She shook my hand when I came in, and didn't do that thing some people do where they look at you with their head tilted like you're something fragile. She just looked at me directly. And that was exactly what I needed. I laid out everything I'd brought. Bank statements going back 2 years, the mortgage documents, both car titles, Ryan's last 2 tax returns, which we'd filed jointly, and which I had copies of because I always handled the filing. Patricia went through everything methodically, making notes on a yellow legal pad, occasionally asking a quiet question. How long married, kids' ages, whether the house was in both names, whether I was currently employed and what my income looked like. I answered everything. I was prepared. I had always been prepared. That was the one thing this situation hadn't taken from me. She pointed to the bank statement from 11 months ago. A series of transactions, midweek, small amounts. A restaurant I didn't recognize. A hotel charge for one night in a city 2 hours from here where Ryan had told me he had a work conference. A charge at a jewelry store in that same city. I looked at the jewelry store charge. I looked at my left hand. He told me the conference was 3 days. I said. He came back with a sunburn and a golf story. Patricia wrote something on her legal pad. The hotel was 1 night, not 3. The charges dated the 2nd day of the supposed conference. I nodded, filed it away in the practical wall I'd built. What does all this mean for our situation? It means we have a clear picture, she said, which is what we need before we do anything else. She took her glasses off. Carol, I want to ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly. What is it you actually want out of this process? Not what you think you're supposed to want. What do you actually want? I thought about Tyler asking where Daddy was for 11 nights straight. I thought about Emma pouring her own cereal with careful, quiet eyes. I thought about Linda's piece of paper with the neat handwriting and 14 months of dates. I want my kids to be stable, I said. I want the house. And I want this to be over as cleanly as possible without dragging my children through something ugly. Patricia put her glasses back on. That's a reasonable set of goals, she said. And achievable, but I need you to understand something going in. Clean doesn't always mean fast, and the other side doesn't always cooperate with clean. I told her I understood. I told her I was patient, right up until I wasn't. Ryan called me that Thursday evening, exactly 1 week after the first Thursday, which felt like some kind of cruel symmetry. The kids were doing homework at the kitchen table, and I stepped out onto the back porch and closed the door behind me. I think we should talk, he said. In person, without attorneys yet. We have attorneys now, I said, a pause. Already? Ryan, you left 8 days ago. I thought we'd have more time before it got to that point. I stood on my back porch looking at the yard. The grass needed cutting. That had always been Ryan's job, and now I was going to have to figure out whose job it was going to be going forward. That's the kind of thought that ambushes you. Not the big grief, but the lawn. The specific stupid lawn. What did you want to talk about? I asked. He was quiet for a moment. I want to explain some things. You don't have to explain anything to me, Ryan. I think I have a pretty clear picture. Carol, her name, I said. What's her name? Another pause. Longer this time. Melissa. A regular name for a regular person who drove a white Subaru and parked in front of my house for 14 months. How long? I said. Carol, I don't think that's... How long, Ryan? He exhaled. About a year and a half. 2 months longer than Linda's earliest date on that piece of paper, which meant it started before Linda even noticed the car, which meant the real beginning was somewhere I couldn't see yet. I didn't say anything for a moment. Behind me, through the glass door, I could see Emma helping Tyler with something at the table, leaning over to look at his worksheet, pointing at something. My 2 kids doing homework on a Thursday evening while their father explained the timeline of his other life on the phone. Okay, I said. Okay? That's... Carol, I expected you to... What did you expect me to do, Ryan? Scream? Fall apart? I have 2 kids 6 feet away from me doing their homework. I kept my voice level. Not cold, just level. You'll hear from Patricia Hollins. Please make sure your attorney is responsive. I went back inside before he could say anything else. The thing with Emma happened 4 days later. It was a Sunday. I was folding laundry on the couch. One of those mindless tasks that your hands do while your brain goes somewhere else entirely. Emma came and sat next to me and picked up one of Tyler's shirts and started folding it, which she never does unprompted. I let her fold, didn't say anything. Sometimes with Emma, you just have to give her the space to arrive at whatever she's working toward. After a minute, she said, without looking up from the laundry, Kayla's mom told Kayla that Daddy has a girlfriend. I set down what I was folding. Kayla is Emma's best friend. They've been inseparable since 2nd grade. They live 4 streets over. Kayla's mom is a woman named Brenda, who I have been friendly with for 3 years at school pickups and fundraiser events. When did Kayla tell you that? I asked. At school on Friday. Emma was still folding, very focused on the corners. She said her mom said it was sad. About our family. I looked at my daughter's profile. 9 years old, folding laundry on a Sunday. Carrying information she'd been sitting on for 2 days. How did that make you feel? I asked. She was quiet for a moment. Embarrassed, she said finally, very quietly, like she was ashamed of the word. That one landed differently than anything else had. Not the hotel receipt, not the jewelry store charge, not Melissa's name or the year and a half. My 9-year-old daughter sitting next to me on the couch on a Sunday saying she felt embarrassed. I put my arm around her. She leaned into me the way she used to when she was much smaller. That full-body lean of a kid who needs to be held but is too old to ask directly. You don't have anything to be embarrassed about. I said, not one single thing. Whatever is happening between me and Daddy has nothing to do with who you are. Kayla said maybe you'd move. We're not moving. How do you know? Because I'm keeping this house if it's the last thing I do. That's what I didn't say. Because this is our home, I said instead. And I'm not going anywhere. She was quiet for a little while. Then she sat up and picked up the next thing from the laundry pile and went back to folding, and the conversation was over the way Emma's conversations end. Completely. Cleanly. No loose threads. But I sat there for a moment after she moved on and I thought about Brenda. Brenda, who I had stood next to at school fundraisers. Brenda, who knew something about my marriage and had told her 9-year-old daughter, who had then told mine. I made a mental note not to be angry about it. I didn't have the energy for anger about Brenda, just to remember it. To remember that my life was now a thing that other people were discussing in their own kitchens, over their own dinners, and that my children were hearing the edges of those conversations at school. That was the moment the practical wall I'd built got a little sturdier, because this wasn't just about me anymore. It had never been just about me. It was about Emma, folding laundry and saying she felt embarrassed. It was about Tyler, who had stopped asking where Daddy was. It was about those 2 kids in that house and what kind of ground I was going to build under their feet. I called Patricia Hollins first thing Monday morning. I'm ready to move forward, I said. Whatever the next step is, I'm ready. Good, she said. Because Ryan's attorney reached out Friday. He wants the house. I stood in my kitchen in the early morning quiet, coffee in hand, kids still asleep upstairs. He can want whatever he likes, I said. Patricia told me that Ryan's attorney had framed the house request around the mortgage. Ryan's income was the primary one, and they were going to argue that maintaining the payment would be a hardship without his contribution. What they didn't know yet, and what Patricia and I spent the next week preparing, was that I had 3 years of documentation showing my direct financial contributions to the household that had never been formally accounted for. Every receipt, every bill in my name, every home repair I had managed and paid for while Ryan was at work, or, as I now understood, somewhere else entirely, I had kept everything. I had always kept everything, and now for the first time, that habit was going to mean something. I want to tell you about the mediation session first, because it matters for everything that comes after. Patricia had explained the process to me the week before. Mediation meant both sides sitting in the same building, not necessarily the same room. with a neutral third party trying to help us reach an agreement without going in front of a judge. She said it was worth trying before litigation. Less expensive, less time, less exposure for the kids. I agreed because of the kids. That was always my deciding factor. Every single choice I made from the Thursday Ryan left came back to that one question. What does this do to Emma and Tyler? The morning of mediation, I got up at 5:30, made coffee, sat at the kitchen table in the quiet, and went through my folder one more time, even though I already knew everything in it. I had organized it by category: household contributions, mortgage payment history, insurance documents, the kids' medical and school records that I had always managed entirely alone. 3 years of careful documentation that told a very clear story about who had actually been running this household. I wore the same kind of outfit I'd wear to a work presentation. Neat, comfortable, nothing that required thinking about. I dropped Emma at school and Tyler at daycare and drove to the mediator's office on Clement Street and sat in the parking lot for 4 minutes before going in. Ryan was already there when I arrived, sitting in the waiting area with his attorney, a man named Gerald, who had a firm handshake and a very practiced neutral expression. Ryan looked up when I walked in, and I looked back at him, and we did that thing we'd been doing since he left, acknowledging each other with our eyes in the way of two people who used to know everything about each other and now knew mostly paperwork. He looked tired still, and something else, uncomfortable in a specific way that I recognized from our marriage. The way he looked, when he knew he was wrong about something but hadn't decided yet how to handle being wrong. Patricia touched my arm lightly and steered me into a separate room. The mediator was a woman named Carolyn, 60s, reading glasses on a beaded chain, the kind of calm that comes from spending decades in rooms full of people who are in pain and have learned not to take it personally. She explained the process, asked both sides to commit to respectful communication, and we began. The house was the first issue. Ryan's position, delivered through Gerald in that careful legal language that drains emotion out of everything, was that given the mortgage obligations and Ryan's primary income contribution, a sale of the property with divided equity was the most practical resolution. I let Patricia respond. That's what I'd paid her for. Patricia laid out my documentation methodically. 3 years of household management records, my direct financial contributions to utilities, repairs, groceries, childcare, a calculation of the economic value of the unpaid household labor I had absorbed, while Ryan's income remained unencumbered by those responsibilities. She presented it the way you present evidence, flatly, clearly, without editorial. There was a silence after she finished. Gerald leaned over and said something quietly to Ryan. Ryan looked at the table. Then Ryan did something I hadn't expected. He looked up and across at me directly, bypassing both attorneys, and said, "I didn't mean for this to become adversarial, Carol." I looked at him steadily. "I know you didn't," I said, "but it is what it is." Carolyn gently redirected us back to process, but something had shifted in the room. Ryan's position on the house softened over the next hour. Not completely. There was still negotiation. Still back and forth about equity and timeline and refinancing options. But the wall of his opening position had developed a crack, and we both knew it. We didn't resolve everything that day. Patricia had told me not to expect to, but we left with a framework. The house would remain with me. I would refinance to remove Ryan's name within 18 months, and the equity split would account for my documented contributions. It wasn't everything I wanted. It was enough to build on. I drove to pick up Tyler from daycare, and then Emma from aftercare, and I took them to get ice cream, even though it was a Tuesday and a school night, because sometimes you need to mark a day somehow, even if you can't explain to your kids exactly why Emma got mint chip. Tyler got strawberry and ate half of it and then declared he'd wanted chocolate all along. Regular Tuesday, regular kids. I sat across from them at that little ice cream table and watched them and felt something loosen very slightly in my chest. That was the afternoon. The phone call came that evening. I had just gotten the kids to bed. Tyler had needed 2 stories and a glass of water and a renegotiation of the blanket situation. Emma had read for a while with her light on before I went in and turned it off. By 8:45, the house was quiet, and I was sitting on the couch with a cup of tea going through some work emails when my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. I almost let it go to voicemail. I'm glad I didn't. Is this Carol? A woman's voice. Careful. Like she'd rehearsed the opening. Yes. Who is this? A pause. My name is Melissa. I set my tea down. "I know you probably don't want to hear from me," she said, "and I understand if you hang up, but I need to tell you something, and I needed to tell you directly. Not through attorneys, not through Ryan. Directly." I didn't hang up. I don't entirely know why. Maybe because her voice didn't sound like I'd expected it to. I'd built a version of Melissa in my head over the previous weeks. Something easier to be angry at. The voice on the phone sounded tired and a little scared and very human. "I'm listening," I said. She took a breath. "Ryan told me you knew about us from the beginning, that you had an arrangement, that the marriage had been over in practice for years, and you were both just waiting for the right time to separate officially." I stared at the wall across from me. "He told me you were fine with it," she continued, "that you'd talked about it, that there were no hard feelings and it was mutual." Another breath. I believed him. For a long time I believed him because he was consistent about it, and I wanted to believe him. "I need you to know that I understand that's not an excuse." The room was very quiet. "When did you find out that wasn't true?" I asked. My voice came out steadier than I felt 3 weeks ago. We had an argument and I asked him directly why the divorce was taking so long if everything was so amicable. And he said something that didn't add up. So I pushed, and the story started changing. She paused. I'm not calling to make myself feel better. I know how this looks. I thought you should know what he told me. Because it matters for how you understand what happened. I sat with that for a moment. Ryan had told this woman that I knew, that I had agreed, that it was mutual. He had constructed a version of our marriage for her consumption that absolved him of everything and turned me into a willing participant in my own betrayal. Thank you for telling me, I said. I'm sorry, she said. I genuinely am. I believe you, I said. And I did. Not completely, not without reservation, but enough. We hung up. I sat there for a long time. Here is what I felt. In order, shock, then a strange cold anger, then something that surprised me. A kind of sad understanding. Not for Ryan, for the whole architecture of it. The way he had managed everyone's perception simultaneously. His image with me, his image with Melissa, his image on the soccer sideline with his hands in his pockets. All of it carefully maintained. All of it eventually unsustainable. I called Patricia the next morning and told her about the call. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, would Melissa be willing to put that in writing? I thought about the tired, careful voice on the phone, the woman who had driven a white Subaru and parked in front of my house and believed what she'd been told because she'd wanted to. I think she might, I said. Melissa did put it in writing, a detailed account of what Ryan had told her about our marriage, submitted to Patricia in a signed statement 10 days later. I never asked her to do it, she offered. Patricia said it was significant, not because we needed it to win anything, but because it completed the picture in a way that mattered for the final terms. Ryan's attorney called Patricia the day after receiving it and asked if we could schedule a settlement conversation. Patricia called me immediately. They want to talk, she said. I think they finally understand what they're dealing with. I was in the work parking lot again, 5 minutes before my shift. Schedule it, I said. I'm ready. I need to tell you about the week before the settlement conversation. I went quiet internally in a way I hadn't expected. Not shut down. I was still functioning, still present, still doing all the things that needed doing, but something had settled in me after Melissa's phone call, like a snow globe that had been shaken violently for weeks, and was finally, slowly, letting everything drift back down to the bottom. I think what happened was that I finally had the complete picture. Not every detail, not every date, not every specific moment I'd been standing in one room while something else entirely was happening somewhere else, but the shape of it, the full shape. And there is something unexpectedly clarifying about that, about moving from suspicion and partial information into plain documented truth. It doesn't stop hurting, but it hurts differently, more cleanly. Patricia had scheduled the settlement conversation for a Thursday. Of course it was a Thursday. Everything in this chapter of my life seemed to happen on Thursdays. The night before, I sat at the kitchen table after the kids were in bed and I wrote out what I wanted. Not legal language, not bullet points for Patricia. Just for myself, in my own handwriting, on a regular piece of notebook paper, what I wanted my life to look like in 1 year. In 3 years, what I needed Emma and Tyler to be able to count on: the house, stable school and childcare, a custody arrangement that kept the kids' routine as intact as possible, child support calculated honestly, and something less tangible but equally important to me: a clean ending. Not friendly, not pretend, just clean. No ongoing warfare. No attorneys calling each other every other week, no children used as messengers. I folded the paper and put it in my cardigan pocket and carried it with me to the settlement meeting the next morning. The meeting was in Patricia's conference room this time, not the mediator's office. Neutral ground had served its purpose. This was the closing conversation, and Patricia wanted it on her turf, which I understood. Ryan came in with Gerald and sat across the table, and I noticed immediately that something about him had changed since the mediation session. He seemed quieter, less defended somehow. Like a person who has spent several weeks holding a position and finally gotten tired of holding it. Gerald opened with their revised proposal. It had moved significantly from the original. The house framework from mediation was largely intact. The child support figure had been recalculated upward from their first number. The custody proposal was close to what Patricia and I had outlined. Primary residence with me, Ryan having the kids every other weekend and 1 weeknight, with flexibility built in for holidays and school events. It wasn't perfect. Patricia pushed on 3 specific points: the child support calculation, the timeline for the refinance, and a clause about decision-making authority for the kids' education and medical care. Gerald pushed back on 2 of them. They went back and forth in that careful professional language while Ryan and I sat on opposite sides of the table and mostly looked at the papers in front of us. At one point, there was a break. Gerald stepped out to make a call. Patricia went to get water from the small table by the window. And for the second time in these proceedings, I found myself across a table from Ryan with no buffer between us. He looked at his hands for a moment. Then he looked at me. "Melissa told me she called you," he said. "She did. I owe you an apology for what I told her." He said it quietly, not the quick apology he used to offer in our marriage, the kind designed to end a conversation. This one had a different weight to it. I told her things that weren't true because it made it easier to justify. That wasn't fair to you. I looked at him across the table, this man I had built a life with, whose children were currently in school and daycare 4 miles from here, going about their Thursday with no idea what was being decided in this room. "I know why you did it," I said. That doesn't make it okay, but I understand the mechanics of it. He nodded. You were always smarter about people than I gave you credit for. I didn't know what to do with that, so I let it sit there. I don't want this to be ugly for Emma and Tyler, he said. Whatever else? I don't want that. Then don't make it ugly, I said. It's actually that simple, Ryan. Patricia came back with her water, and Gerald came back from his call, and we went back to the documents. But something had shifted again, the way it had in the mediation room. Ryan's attorney became slightly more flexible on the 2 remaining points. Not completely. Gerald earned his fee, I'll give him that, but enough. We reached agreement at 12:47 in the afternoon. I know because I looked at the clock when Carolyn, the mediator who had joined us for the final session, said the words, "I think we have a framework." Patricia squeezed my hand briefly under the table, which was the most demonstrative I had ever seen her. I signed where I was told to sign. Ryan signed across the table. Gerald gathered his papers. Patricia gathered hers. Ryan and I ended up walking out through the same door at the same time. A few steps apart, the way you do when the logistics of a building don't care about the emotional choreography of the moment. In the parking lot, he stopped and turned. "Take care of yourself, Carol," he said. "I will," I said. "You too." And that was that. 12 years of knowing someone, 7 years of marriage, 2 children, 1 house, and a parking lot on a Thursday afternoon. I drove to pick up Tyler first, then Emma. I didn't take them for ice cream this time. I took them home, made dinner, regular Thursday dinner, pasta, which had always been Monday's meal on my color-coded plan. But the color-coded plan had been gone for months, and pasta on Thursday turned out to be fine. The thing with Emma happened after dinner. She'd been quieter than usual all week. Not sad exactly, just watchful in her way. She'd heard Tyler ask about Daddy that morning. He'd started asking again recently, less frequently but still. And I'd explained again that Daddy had his own home now and they'd see him soon. After dinner, Emma helped me clear the table without being asked. Then she stood at the sink next to me while I washed and she dried, this 9-year-old with a dish towel, and she said, "Did you and Daddy finish figuring everything out?" I looked at her sideways. "What makes you ask that? You seem different today. Calmer. 9 years old." "Yeah," I said. "We finished figuring most of it out." She nodded, drying a glass carefully. "Are you sad?" I thought about it honestly. "A little," I said, "but mostly I'm okay. Ms. Henderson at school says it's okay to be both things at the same time." Ms. Henderson was Emma's teacher. I made a mental note to say something to her at the next conference because clearly she was doing something right. "Ms. Henderson is correct," I said. Emma put the dried glass in the cabinet, picked up the next one. "I told Kayla that we're not moving," she said. "Matter of fact, final." "Good," I said. "Because we're not." She looked at me then. This careful, quiet child who had been watching and processing and holding things gently for months. "I know," she said. "I told her you promised." I kept washing dishes. The window above the sink looks out at the backyard, and the evening light was coming through at that particular angle that makes everything look softer than it is. The grass still needed cutting. I'd hired a teenager from 2 streets over to do it, and he came every 2 weeks and was perfectly reliable, and it was fine. Things were getting figured out. "One practical problem at a time, Mom," Emma said. "Yeah, baby. I'm glad we're staying." I handed her the next dish to dry. "Me too," I said, and I meant it in a way that surprised me with its simplicity. No complicated grief attached to it, no asterisk, just the plain truth of standing in my kitchen on a Thursday evening with my daughter drying dishes beside me. We were staying. I had made sure of it. Ryan took the kids for the first official custody weekend 3 weeks later. I packed their bags carefully. Tyler's with his stuffed elephant and his specific pajamas, Emma's with her book and the little lavender spray she used on her pillow. I stood at the door and waved when Ryan's car pulled away, and I went back inside to a house that was completely quiet for the first time in 9 years. I sat on the couch. I didn't turn the television on. I just sat there in the quiet and let myself feel the full weight of it, the loss and the relief existing in the same moment, taking up equal space. Then I picked up the phone and called Diane. "They just left," I said. "How are you doing?" she asked. I looked around my living room, my couch, my walls, my house. "I think I'm going to be okay," I said. And for the first time since the Thursday he left, I actually believed it. I've been sitting here trying to figure out how to start this last part. Not because I don't know what to say, more because this is the part where I'm supposed to tie everything together, and I've read enough of these stories online to know how they usually go. The triumphant ending, the woman standing in her power, the neat bow on top of a messy year. And I want to be honest with you because I've been honest this whole time. Real life doesn't tie up that cleanly, but it does get quieter. And quiet, I've learned, is its own kind of gift. So let me just tell you what 1 year looks like. Ryan and Melissa are still together. I know because Emma mentioned it casually one Sunday evening after a custody weekend, the way she mentions most things, matter-of-factly, while doing something else entirely. She was untying her shoes at the door, and she said, "Melissa made waffles this morning. She puts blueberries in them." I said that sounded good. Emma said they were pretty good, but not as good as mine. I did not ask follow-up questions. I filed it under things I know and don't need to examine. Tyler has stopped asking where Daddy is. Not because he doesn't miss Ryan. He does. In that open, uncomplicated way of 6-year-olds who haven't learned yet to hide their feelings behind practicality. He asks when he's seeing Daddy next, which is a different question. A forward-looking question. I prefer it. The custody schedule works. Not perfectly. Nothing with 2 kids and 2 households and 2 sets of feelings works perfectly. There are Sundays when the handoff is tense, and Thursdays when Ryan texts about scheduling changes with the energy of someone who finds the whole logistics exhausting. There are moments when I have to remind myself that co-parenting well is not about how I feel about Ryan. It's about what Emma and Tyler see modeled between their parents. So I keep the texts factual and the handoffs civil, and I save my feelings for Diane and my Thursday evening phone calls with Patricia when something needs navigating. Yes, I still talk to Patricia occasionally. She has become unexpectedly something adjacent to a friend, or at least the kind of professional relationship that has earned a first-name basis, and the occasional check-in that isn't strictly billable. The house. I refinanced 6 months after the settlement, sat across from a loan officer named Greg, who was approximately 28 years old, and walked me through the paperwork with genuine helpfulness. When it was done and I drove home, I sat in the driveway for a minute and looked at the front of the house. The flag holder by the door that I'd never gotten around to actually using, the flower bed that needed fresh mulch, the gutter on the left side that had been slightly loose since March mine. Actually, legally, solely mine. I went inside and stood in the kitchen and put both hands flat on the counter the way you do when you need to feel something solid. Then I called the teenager from 2 streets over and asked if he knew anyone who did gutters. Small things. One at a time. The school play happened in April. Emma's class did a production of a simplified version of Charlotte's Web, which, if you know the story, you know ends with Charlotte dying and Wilbur learning to carry grief and keep living. Extremely ambitious, emotional territory for 9-year-olds, but their teacher, Ms. Henderson, who I had come to genuinely appreciate, believed children could handle more than adults usually gave them credit for. Emma played Charlotte. I sat in the 3rd row of the school auditorium on a Tuesday evening with Tyler beside me, who had been bribed into reasonable behavior with the promise of a cookie afterward. Ryan was there too. We'd agreed to both attend school events regardless of the custody schedule, because Patricia had put it in the parenting plan, and also because it was the right thing to do. He sat 4 rows behind me with Melissa, which I knew because Diane, who had come with me, leaned over before the lights went down and said quietly, "Behind us." 4 rows. I nodded. Filed it away, focused on the stage. Emma was extraordinary. I don't say that purely as her mother, though I am absolutely her mother and entirely biased. I say it because the auditorium, which had been full of the particular restless noise of parents and siblings settling in, went genuinely quiet when Emma delivered Charlotte's final lines. This 9-year-old in a spider costume, standing in a spotlight speaking about friendship and endings and the things we leave behind. I felt Tyler's small hand find mine in the dark. I held it when the lights came up for the curtain call and Emma spotted me in the audience. She gave me this wave, not a child's enthusiastic wave, but a specific, knowing look that said, "I saw you watching and I did okay, right?" And I gave her a thumbs up and she broke into her full smile, and that was the moment. Right there, that something finished healing that I hadn't even realized was still healing. After the play in the hallway, in the chaos of parents finding children and children showing off their costumes, Ryan appeared at my elbow. Melissa was a few steps behind him, being thoughtfully unobtrusive. "She was incredible," he said. "She really was," I said. We stood there for a moment in the noisy hallway, 2 people who had built this child together, watching her accept compliments from her teacher with that serious, composed expression she always got when she was trying not to show how pleased she was. "We did something right," Ryan said, quietly. Not to me exactly. More to the air between us. I didn't respond. But I didn't disagree either. Diane asked me a few months ago when I thought I had turned the corner. She wasn't asking about the legal stuff or the practical stuff. She was asking about the inside thing, the actual recovery. I told her about a morning in February. It was an ordinary Tuesday. I woke up at 6:15 before my alarm. The room was gray and cold the way Ohio February mornings are gray and cold. That specific quality of winter light that doesn't commit to being either dark or bright. I lay there for a minute in the quiet, and I did a kind of internal inventory the way I'd gotten into the habit of doing. How are the kids? What's on today? Is there anything I've forgotten? And somewhere in the middle of that inventory, I realized I had gotten all the way to Tuesday morning without thinking about Ryan once. Not once since waking up. The first thought of my day had been about Emma's permission slip and Tyler's dentist appointment, and whether I'd move the laundry from the washer to the dryer before bed. Regular Tuesday thoughts. Not grief thoughts. Not anger thoughts. Not the constant low background hum of processing and reprocessing that had been running underneath everything for the better part of a year. Just the laundry. Lay there in the gray February light, and I let myself notice it. The absence of it. The way a headache that has been with you for so long you forgot it was there, sometimes just quietly lifts in the night, and you wake up and the absence is its own specific sensation. I got up, made coffee. Packed lunches, drove carpool. Ordinary Tuesday. That was the morning. Here is what I want to say to finish this. I'm not going to tell you I'm grateful for what happened. I'm not there, and I'm not sure I'll get there, and I don't think I'm required to. Some things that happen to us are not hidden gifts. Some things are just hard and unfair, and they cost us something real, and the honest version of moving forward is not pretending otherwise. What I will tell you is this. I know things now that I didn't know on the Thursday. Ryan packed 2 bags while I was reading Tyler his bedtime story. I know what I'm capable of managing alone. I know that being organized and paying attention and keeping your receipts is not just a personality trait, it's a form of self-protection that I happen to have already built without knowing I'd need it. I know that my daughter is more resilient than I feared, and my son is more perceptive than I realized, and that kids generally need less perfection and more steadiness than we think. I know that Linda next door, who grows tomatoes every summer, is one of the better people I've met in my life. She brought a basket over in July, and I invited her in for coffee, and we sat at the kitchen table for 2 hours and talked about everything and nothing, and I thought, this is what good neighbors actually are. Not just people who wave from driveways, people who notice things and decide that telling the truth is kinder than staying comfortable. I know that Diane was right that Sunday night on my couch. It took longer than I wanted, and I am okay. The grass gets cut every 2 weeks. The gutter got fixed in May. The color-coded calendar is still on the refrigerator, but I've stopped color-coding it. Just regular pen now. Dates and times and school events and custody weekends and dentist appointments, all in the same ink. No system required. Emma starts 4th grade in the fall. Tyler lost his first tooth last week and put it under his pillow with the specific solemn ceremony of a child who has decided to take tooth fairy protocol very seriously. Regular life. Moving at its regular pace. I'm in it. Actually in it, not just moving through it. That's enough. That's actually more than enough.